So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us on today's webinar, Monthly Bookkeeping Process for Fashion Brands. My name is Jeff, and I'm the head of marketing here at A2X, and I'll be your co-host for today's webinar. But really lucky to have Dan Luthi from IgniteSpot here to share his expertise with all of you. Partner at IgniteSpot, Dan, thanks so much for joining us and for sharing your knowledge on bookkeeping for fashion. If it's all right, do you mind if I give you a few minutes to introduce yourself as well as IgniteSpot?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So I'm super excited to be here. We've been working as an accounting firm for almost 16 years now. I've been with the firm for almost 14 of those years, which has just been a fantastic journey. We have always focused on providing accounting solutions for small businesses. And so whether that's in bookkeeping or fractional CFO services, we've really always prided ourselves in being connected to those entrepreneurs who are really looking to build their business. And for me, I've loved it because I grew up working in small businesses, but then I also love the technology side. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to that piece. And so there's a lot of opportunity that we can use technology to be able to help make our accounting needs or organizational needs more efficient, as well as provide way better information to be able to help us make better business decisions as well too. And so myself, again, been here for 15 years or 14 years, and the firm's been around for 16, but we're just really excited to be here and talk about the impact of what you can do on accounting processes for fashion brands.
Awesome. And then speaking of accounting processes, we've structured the webinar in a way in which the front half is really focused on kind of accounting and bookkeeping concepts for fashion brands. And then the back half gets into the nitty gritty of the actual tasks to complete bookkeeping for these types of businesses. So if you're watching this webinar on demand and you already kind of get the concepts, you can feel free to watch the end. Or if you want to watch the whole thing, you can do that as well. So today's agenda is focused that, the first two conceptual pillars is why is accurate bookkeeping important for fashion brands? One of the things that we've seen here at A2X is 2023 and 2024 has really been kind of the years of operational excellence and efficiency. And a lot of that is driven through financial insights, which is why accurate accounting and bookkeeping have become more and more important for these businesses, especially if you consider that, 2020 and 2021, 2022 is kind of the growth at all cost phase. So we're transitioning into this new era of efficiency, and accounting and bookkeeping is becoming incredibly important as part of it. And then really the meat and potatoes of the webinar, we're going to jump in at the end into the monthly bookkeeping checklist. So really tactically what you need and the step-by-step guide where Dan's going to walk you through it. We've actually even put together a handout. If you're watching the webinar online, go to the description below. The link is going to be there. This handout is going to be the tactical step-by-step process for your monthly bookkeeping as a fashion brand. Cool. So now that you have that, hopefully you've opened it and taken a gander at the awesome resource that Dan and Victoria have put together. Let's talk a little bit about why is accurate bookkeeping important for fashion brands, and then we'll talk about why it's a little bit more challenging. So Dan, I'm actually going to pass the mic over to you, even though I do have strong opinions on this. I know that you working with these types of businesses every single day, you can really understand the impacts of doing it well, but also what happens when it's not done so well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I love the fact that we talk about accurate. Like the word accurate, I think, is really critical with this, because when it comes to dealing with fashion brand accounting, there are so many different pieces that play into it, and coming to the figures of dealing with your cost of acquisition or manufacturing of the goods you're selling, dealing with the softwares and platforms and tools you're using in order to be able to market it, as well as to be able to put it on your website and everything from that perspective. All of those pieces really create a complex workflow that you really need to get a good understanding of. And so gathering that information together, organizing it, really helps to create opportunities for clear financial understanding, and help you to get a really clear understanding about where the health of your organization is. And so really excited to talk through some of the steps that need to be done later on with that to be able to get you that better visualization. Plus also too, just the fact that if you decide to work with an accountant, there's some things that they can help you with to create better visualization with it as well. But ultimately, the goal is to provide you with better information, better data, so that you can grow your business and also be able to make the money that's necessary for you to be able to continue to take care of your needs as well.
Yeah. And I can actually even jump in with a little bit more of like a tactical view. If you're doing your bookkeeping accurately and consistency, it helps you at tax time, makes taxes way less burdensome at the end of the year, and also helps you pay the right amount, not overpay or underpay, and potentially open yourself up to an audit. Uh, Accurate bookkeeping helps you acquire loans, sets you up for potential M&A, potential investment, depending on the scale and size of your organization. We talk about this concept a lot that as a business owner, you are the primary investor in your business. When you're, and Dan was like really hitting home on this one, the financial insights, like you want to have a clear financial picture of how your business is performing so that you could actually, make some really solid decisions on how to run it more effectively. So that's kind of on the why it's important. And we can talk about that all day. But let's talk a little bit about what makes it so complicated for fashion brands. I'll jump in after Dan kind of talks a little bit about it tactically, why it makes it really complicated from an e-commerce perspective. But there's so much more than just e-commerce when it comes to fashion brand accounting complexity.
Yeah, very much so. Well, I'm going to dive into the second bullet point on here first, because I think it tees or follows up really well with the comment you made about having different channels or different sales places. Online is definitely one of the primary places we're seeing right now with retail pieces when it comes to dealing with fashion, selling, clothing and things of that nature, but also brick and mortar is coming back in a lot of cases as well. We're starting to see more pop-ups. We're starting to see more functions from that perspective as well too, little kiosks and different things from that nature, as well as big full-blown stores. And so understanding the inputs of all that information so that you can better control your sales detail, understand where your inventory is located is really, really critical. Tying it back up to the first bullet point on here, which is inventory management. When it comes to dealing with fashion and working through it, oftentimes you have materials and inventory spread out all over the place. And I think that's one of the big concerns that goes along with it, dealing with seasonality and trends, and now with potential cross-border. All of these different pieces create complication for you in order to be able to make sure that you're not just having levels and 3 years worth of inventory, when in reality your cycle of your trends of your clothing is changing every 6 months, or potentially every 3 months, depending on the type of style of products you're selling. And so all of these things just add so much more level of difficulty, but to that same point, create a lot of opportunity for you to be able to come into better clarification on what's going on when you start gathering this data into a single spot. That where, Jeff, you hit this nail on the head with us earlier, the compliance component of it. You're prepared for your taxes when all this information is gathered. You know where you need to be at from a sales or VAT tax compliance space. And then again, the reporting aspect becomes really critical, because investors now become a part of what's going on in your world outside of just you. It might be family, it might be a larger organization, or a venture capital that's investing into you. They're going to require that data so that you can be able to make good decisions. And so all these pieces kind of play into the complexity that goes along with really making sure your fashion brand can be successful.
Yeah. And like, you talked about a bunch of different channels, whether retail or pop-ups or e-commerce. There's also wholesale, right? Like third-party applications and marketplaces like Fair that are starting to pop up and gain a lot more traction. So
Absolutely.
really the name of the game is getting your products in front of as many potential buyers as humanly possible, which is great, right? But then if you're successful at that, then the challenge comes with the actual accounting for those sales, which is a good problem to have, and one that hopefully will help you solve in this webinar.
It's a problem everybody wants to have, right? Is being able to sell and being able to grow and know what's going on. And so as much as these make it complicated, they're also the things that are helping your business to flourish. And so we want to make sure that we're understanding them correctly, and make sure that you're thinking about the steps you have to take every single month to be able to make sure you get that good visualization and can make better decisions.
Okay, cool. So if you're watching on demand, this is really the part of the webinar where we get into the nitty-gritty details of the monthly bookkeeping process. We're going to start with what you need. So again, if you're watching the webinar live, you would have received the handout earlier in the chat. If you're watching the webinar on demand, the link is in the description below. So you can refer to the checklist as we go through this process, which allows you to kind of hopefully do it yourself once this webinar is done. Okay, so Dan, I'm gonna jump to you on the what you need for your monthly bookkeeping process as a fashion brand.
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I want to say is please don't get overwhelmed by the list. The list is, and these are just the things we want to make sure you're thinking about, and that you're making sure you have an understanding of where that information is at. Of course, first things first, where are our bank and credit card statements? We need to know what our ins and outs are for not only cash, but also credit card expenses and where our liabilities are going to be in the future. Knowing that and having those documentation is going to be critical for one of our steps that we're going to have with a little bit later. We'll go into detail. The sales channel summary reports or the detail reports. This is, again, one of those areas that with using A2X, you're going to need to be able to, again, verify it, make sure that all the details coming in correctly, that you're not missing something on a coding process that's going to give you bad visualization. That's going to help you really heavily get really right into the details and crux of everything. Loan transactions, if you have debt that you're doing to use for your inventory, or you have an investor, getting their statements, making sure you're managing that so you can understand interest is really critical. Diving into the next two pieces, this is really where your money's coming in. This is the inflows and outflows you have. And so making sure you have your merchant account statements and details is going to be really critical, but also understanding which payments haven't cleared yet. Do you have inventory that's outstanding? Do you have items that haven't been purchased or that haven't been sold yet? Things that haven't been shipped? Is there money that you're potentially going to receive in the next month that you should be preparing for, even though you sold it in the prior period? Diving into it, also, you have all of the expenses when it comes to purchasing your inventory, also running your business as a general piece. You want to keep a hold and track of all that detail because you want to make sure it gets in your financials, because that's really what, as Jeff mentioned before, is going to really highlight the opportunities for you to get clarity for tax purposes at the end of the year. But also, those are inputs that really help you to understand the margins you're making on the products that you're selling, and helping you to understand what's going on from there. The next piece, of course, dives into understanding where are the logins for all of our apps that we're using. Do we have them in one place? Do we know what tools we're using for shipping, or what tools we're using for our e-commerce, or does someone else in our organization have that? Well, you're going to want to verify that information in your financials and make sure you have all of that at your fingertips. So make sure that you have that login list. Make sure you have all the details for each of those tools you're using. The sales orders becomes really, really important on this, especially when it comes to the traditional side of AR. And what we mean by traditional style is you sending out an invoice or you creating a transaction that someone's going to pay potentially later. It's not an immediate transaction that you may have had through, through your web store, things of that nature. You're oftentimes going to see this with wholesale. You're going to see this potentially with large purchases and things of that nature from a large group of people. You want to know what you have outstanding in those, and is there a fulfillment association you need to have with those, or is there a collection that we need to follow up with on to make sure you're getting that money? Payroll is everybody's favorite thing. Of course, this is the part that's critical for us to be able to make sure, number one, you have money, but also the people that are working with you have money. And this becomes really critical for us to make sure we know how that breaks up within your organization as well, too, and what your total costs are in each of the different areas that you're working through. Inventory is everybody's favorite conversation, right? It's one of those pieces where we spend a whole lot of money specifically in inventory to get started, to get our products off the ground and get everything moving. But sometimes we forget where our inventory is stored. Sometimes we start using fulfillment houses or Amazon or all these different places, or potentially your own warehouse, and you don't have full records of what the cost was related to buying each of those pieces of material. And that can potentially affect your sales price that you have later on. And so really understanding all of that and how many units came in and went out in the period becomes really important. Copies of contracts and agreements. I love bringing this one up because, again, this is your opportunity to be able to understand what do we have coming down the pipe in the future? What do we not? What do we need to be paying attention to right now to make sure that we're fulfilling all those agreements? And then, of course, sales tax. This is probably one of the areas that is missed most of the time. This is one of the areas that we believe someone else is taking care of it, especially with stores like Amazon, who do a lot of that fulfillment and management for you on the sales tax side of things. Yeah. Understanding your summaries as a whole become really important, because even if you're selling half of your business success through Amazon and then the other through Shopify and other sales channels, the states that you're working with or provinces, if you're dealing with that, or countries, aggregate all of that information together. And so you have to have visualization of everything and all the sales detail to be able to make sure that you can stay in compliance with that sales tax side. And so that becomes really important, even though it's a thing that we oftentimes forget or we don't worry about near as much as we should.
What's really important to note is that all of these items are important regardless of if you are doing your bookkeeping in a spreadsheet, in QuickBooks, in Xero, or any other accounting software. We'd highly recommend the accounting software. And the steps that we're going to showcase in the next upcoming slides, are as it relates to how you would do this if you are using accounting software like QuickBooks, but also applies to Xero, so on and so forth. But the important thing to note is, even if you're doing this in a spreadsheet, you still need all of this information. Dan, anything that you want to add on that comment?
100% agree with that. I love that you brought that up because this is the data that's going to help you again to make good decisions about your business. It's also the things that are flowing through your business on any given day. And if you're not aware of what's happening with some of these different pieces, it can actually cause dramatic issues with your organization later on, especially if you're trying to scale and grow, if you're looking for investors. One of the things that I've seen probably more in the last 3 years when it comes to investors looking at e-commerce businesses or sales businesses and dealing with fashion or anything from that perspective is sales tax. Actually, they don't want to come in and have to assume a huge, massive sales tax liability. They want to know that you've taken care of that. They want you to know that, especially if you're selling overseas, across border into Canada or into Mexico from that perspective, that you have that under wraps and you know what's going on with it, because that's a risk for them that they don't want to assume if you haven't prepared for it. And so gathering all this information really gives you better control over making sure that you can grow and scale your business in the right way.
Nice. Now let's talk about what to do with this information, this is kind of the nitty gritty checklist, step-by-step part. So again, you can refer to your checklist handout and it's going to provide a good guide. Dan's going to provide context on each of these steps. So I'll let you jump right into it.
Yeah, definitely. So we've broken out the next several slides. I just want to give people kind of a precursor into what to expect from this. We're going to break it down in some key sections. So we're not going to see that whole massive list that's already on the spreadsheet that you should all have already be seeing and looking at. But we're going to go section by section in order to be able to help you understand the revenue components, the cost of goods sold, and everything else like that. So first thing we're focusing on right now is your revenue and sales management. I love A2X. That's part of the reason why I'm here today. And that's why I focus on that one as the number one step. You want to use a tool like A2X to be able to push that information into that general ledger tool that you're using, whether it's QuickBooks, whether it's Xero. It becomes really important to make sure that that data is centralized in one place so that you can make good decisions. You can make good, have that context to be able to compare with the other information you have. The same thing comes into place with your brick and mortar store. You really need to be able to have that information aggregated. So if you're using something like Square Retail or something to those effect, have that sync into your financial software as well so that that data can be aggregated together, that all that information can be in one spot.
And if you're using Shopify POS, that also integrates with A2X. So
100%. So I love that call out. I will say this, I've become more and more excited about Shopify POS, honestly, because specifically dealing with fashion brands, you have both channels that you're selling in very regularly, especially with the huge movement of pop-ups that we're starting to see right now and dealing with local sales channels and places from there. It's really easy to get all your data in one place. And it's really easy, especially in using tools like A2X that integrate it and push it into your financial system. So now you don't have to have another tool that works with it. So thank you for flagging that one, because I totally agree with you. It's been fantastic to see that grow. But the next part for us, of course, is reviewing it. We want to take those financial reports that we're using or gathering from those sales channels, so Amazon, Shopify, wherever it is, and we're going to compare it to what's happening within QuickBooks. We really need to make sure that nothing's missing, right? Like, we want to go through the lists and the reports in Amazon. We want to gather that data from Shopify to see, do our discounts match? Is there anything wrong potentially with the integration, or is there anything wrong potentially with something that we weren't aware of that we need to pay attention to? And this becomes really important when it comes to extra fees, shipping costs, which Jeff brought up earlier when it came to looking at the import functions that we can bring in from a data level standpoint. All of that becomes really, really, really important for you to have transparency into what's going on. And so gathering those documents and those detail become super critical and help you to be able to verify the detail. The next piece, of course, is then running into our cost of goods sold. We really want to know how much money we've spent on materials, on the products that we sold in a given period. Now, this is a different conversation than understanding inventory in some cases. Cost of goods sold is a component of that. Cost of goods sold is the items that that were sold in the same period of the revenue that you're reporting. And so we want to make sure we have a good understanding of what our unit cost is. How much money did we spend on said shirt or jacket or pair of pants in comparison to how much we sold it for? So a good example of this is it may have cost you $25 to create the unit, and then you sold it for $75. You want to make sure that the $25 is listed very clearly in your cost of goods sold and your $75 is listed very clearly on your revenue side so that you can see the detail in each of those. With Shopify, you can put that information directly into the platform, and that information can come over with your A2X integration, which I absolutely love. Or you can do it in Amazon if you're going through from that perspective as well too. It's just going to give you, again, consolidated detail and give you more accurate information when it comes to what you're spending on your inventory.
Nice.
Diving into more, everybody's favorite part, again, revenue, right? I'm so glad we focused on revenue first because it's the fun part, right? This is the big numbers that we want to see growing all the time. The next big piece too is we actually want to look at the returned quantities that we have from each sales channel. The number one thing that I think is important when it comes to looking at returns is oftentimes we focus too much on what goes out. How much did we sell? What was our total unit count? How many orders did we have? What's going on from that perspective? And we don't think about the potential return association with that. Was there a specific SKU that returned more often than others? Is there a large bulk specific piece that's coming back? We want to understand and know that because that potentially is going to impact your purchasing. It may impact the actual change in brand or the style of merchandise that you're selling in the future. You really want to understand that detail specifically, especially when it comes to fashion, because that can change everything when it comes to your new brands that you're launching in the or your new products that you're launching in the coming weeks and months.
Returns especially relevant for fashion. I feel like more so than any other e-commerce category, or I would even say product category, to be perfectly honest.
Oh, 100% agree with you, because it's one of those things, and especially it's one of those things that are so impacted by timing. The type of clothing that we wear, that we buy, don't always stand the test of time like it was 100 years ago, where you could buy a pair of jeans and wear it for, for eternity. We live in a 100 but all those things are changing, and we need to make sure that you're producing the right type of, inventory that can be sold in the next coming months or in your next, cycle run that you're going to go through, or seasonal run. The next big thing, again, is coming to deal with our promotional activity. How much inventory did we give away for free? What were our discounts that we offered? And again, one that's even more important now that we have social media that we're working with, how much product did we send to our influencers? Because this becomes a really critical component for us to understand, are we generating or pushing out too much products to our influencers that aren't getting the return back from them? You might have found someone that you really like that's on Instagram or it's on TikTok that you feel like can produce really well for your brand, and you send them $1,000 worth of your merchandise to be able to showcase and to brand from that perspective. But if you don't have visualization into what's happening on what they actually return to you from a revenue standpoint, you may have just dumped $1,000 in inventory and, to that person and never actually saw a dollar from it. And so really important to make sure you understand the promotional outputs that you have and how that relates to your deposits and your inputs that are coming with it as well. I think this is one of those areas that oftentimes becomes really difficult to track in platforms and sales systems. And so you really need to have a keen understanding of what is happening with those influencers and where that money is going out for promotional activities. The next big piece, of course, is unmatched bank deposits. If something comes in that doesn't coincide with what you're showing from your reports that we talked about on the first, or the slide just before this, we want to make sure that we get clarification on those. Instead of just dumping them into our revenue, we need to understand why. Was there something that caused an impact or a change from the potential $10,000 we were supposed to receive to the $8,000 we actually received in our bank account? one of the things we find very common, especially when dealing with retail and especially dealing with e-commerce, is there's periods of times where sometimes our suppliers or these platforms will actually start retaining or holding
Mm.
your money in a set account, a side set account, in the event that you have a lot of returns, in the event that you have a lot of disputes and things of that nature. And so that becomes even more important to watch that detail to make sure that those things tie, so that you're not surprised by this happening. And I use this example of, years and years ago, we worked with a client that started to get a huge amount of disputes happening with the sales that they had going through our organization. And PayPal ended up starting to withhold tens of thousands of dollars, to the point to where they had actually $250,000 they had to float every single month in a reserve account in
Wow.
order to be able to continue to remain as a partner with PayPal. That's something very important you need to be paying attention to as well. And it's not saying PayPal is the only one. Everybody does it. They want to manage their risk with it too, because they're fronting you the money oftentimes. And that's why it's super critical for them to be able to make sure they're managing risk, and you understand the potential impact that has on you as well too.
Yeah, the impact really is on cash flow, right? Which is so important for most e-commerce businesses, or any business, again, product businesses, fashion brands that are purchasing inventory. Like cash flow becomes critically important. So really, to your point, understanding the nuance when something hits the bank account that you're just unsure about, like that actually has a major impact in terms of how you run your business.
Well, very much so. Well, this is one of the parts that I love. And I know this is probably the part that not everybody else loves, but this is the output, right? We love the sales and the money that's coming in, but where I get excited is actually on the money that's going out, because that's really where oftentimes we can control the margins or the profitability you have from your company. So really understanding where those are at, having context, having receipts, having documentation becomes really important for you in making better decisions. And one of the things specifically with dealing with fashion is when it comes to acquiring materials or moving from that perspective, a lot of times price changes depending on what the market is shifting and market is saying. At one point in time, you may be spending $10 on a unit. That may, with that supplier, may shift automatically to where it's selling at $15 a unit. That affects your margins very, very heavily and can impact the way that your opportunity for your business to be successful in the future. And so understanding and knowing that and controlling that and monitoring it becomes really, really important. So you want to make sure that data is coming into one centralized place so that you can make sure you can monitor that to make sure you're not running into issues with the cost inflation, but also at the same point in time too, make sure you can kind of nip it in the bud with some of those expenses that aren't necessary. One of the things that comes specifically into place with this is fulfillment houses. A lot of times we start out shipping and managing inventory ourselves. We use a warehouse, we use a garage, we use people's homes that we know. And sometimes we end up finding that we're actually spending way more money, holding that inventory, whether we're trying to find where it's at, or in a position where oftentimes we're losing money potentially on margin on shipping costs or on just the packaging association with it, where it might be more profitable for you to move it to a fulfillment house to be able to help you manage that stuff easier and to be able to help control it. And that may be also on the opposite, where you move into a fulfillment house and then all of a sudden product costs change and now you need to restructure it, and maybe you're going to start selling in smaller lots or buying in smaller unit counts. You want to make sure you're observing that so you don't get stuck with additional costs that's not necessary. I always bring up with this too is make sure you understand your contracts and agreements you have with these types of things too. A lot of times when you see fulfillment houses or other types of warehousing spaces, you're running longer term contracts. And so you want to make sure you understand and know, especially when it comes to making decisions about the expenses, that you're watching those types of agreements, because you don't want to get stuck in a situation where you have to manage that, or you're stuck in that position for 3 years when the tide shift or the organization shifts or the need for the market shift, and you're now paying additional costs that you don't want to have to continue to front moving forward.
I have a question
Yeah.
on that because I think it's incredibly relevant, and you had mentioned it kind of at the beginning of this slide. It's the piece you have the most control over. What is the cadence in which you recommend your clients evaluate the P&L and evaluate their costs?
I would say at minimum, at least once a month. I
Mm.
think that that's something that's really important, especially when it comes to fashion. There are other businesses that you sell, even if they're e-commerce or if they're online, from that perspective, that your cost is very flat. It's very consistent. There's not a huge upswing or downswing with it. When it comes to fashion specifically, there is a lot of change that happens with it. There's seasonality that you're dealing with, like we talked about, kind of what the complexities that come into it. And so at least every single month, you should be looking at your profit and loss, understanding how much money you're making or not making to really get a good visualization. I would suggest, though, that you do have KPIs or key performance indicators or highlighted areas that you're looking at more frequently. If you can get data to where you're seeing it every single week, whether that's sales in or, some of those items we talked about on the last slides where it was, potentially returns or things of that nature, try to get that to where you can see it very quickly every single week as well, so that you're not finding out about it too late and it's causing too much effect on your business.
Very cool.
Definitely. So of course, the last step on this piece is dealing with classifying those expenses. And so this just means coming in and saying, was this a marketing spend? Was this an advertising spend? Was this inventory? Was this office supplies? Taking the time to go through that and get it associated correctly within your profit and loss is really important. I will add the context to this, and I think this is really important too. If you are selling on multi-channels and different locations from that perspective, if you can track by sales channel, it becomes very valuable for you to understand which channels are being the most successful for you. If you know what your total cost is going within Shopify or going within Amazon, that potentially can mean your warehousing component and everything else like that. It's going to help you to make sure that when you're looking at those financials at the end of the period, you're looking at comparing you're actually able to compare apples to apples. How well is our Shopify location working in comparison to our retail or Amazon? Are we making more money? Are we not? Should we be providing less discounts for this for this avenue or this channel versus this one? What should we be looking at? And so if you can get down to that level, it's going to provide you so much more clarity on where you should be putting your efforts, where you should be putting your growth and your sales focus going forward.
Love it. Cool.
Banks reconciliations. This, of course, is us just ticking and tying all the data that we just talked about. Tying that information out is so critical. It's important for you to make sure that you're not surprised when a deposit comes through or an expense comes through. And so this is one of those areas that helps you to be able to create better visualization. With QuickBooks and with Xero, this is where you start seeing the little green line that says matched. This becomes really important. You want to see those.
And really satisfying.
Yes, 100%. Like every time I get into a reconciliation and everything shows that it was matched, that means all of my technology that I was using or our input process came in correctly, because that helps us to simplify it. Plus also too, when we go over to actually finalize the reconciliation, by kind of going through the triggers from there, you actually see that it matches, that we don't have extra expenses. We don't have extra items that we're missing or didn't know about. That becomes really important for us to tie through as well too. The last piece on this, though, that I want to focus on, which is number 12 here, which is managing the payments, and really understanding the pending component with it. This is where you understanding where your chargebacks, where your refunds are coming to place by each sales channel becomes really important. You want to know which ones are pending, which ones are not, what was impacted with the deposits you received this month and which ones you didn't. Just again, so you can make sure that it's not a specific product line that you're running with, that it wasn't a specific retailer that you were working with that caused a lot of those things. So making sure you have proper visualization there is so critical, and you want to make sure that's tied.
Awesome. Inventory management. You talked about that being one of everyone's favorite subjects.
Yeah, definitely. This is one of the areas that, this and sales tax or VAT tax is one of the areas that I think a lot of times it can get complicated. So we don't want to think about it. We need to know.
That's why I was smiling with my favorite.
Yeah.
My favorite.
Yeah, it's everybody's favorite, right?
Yeah.
You want to know what it costs you to create the product that you're selling. Understanding that and knowing that can be a huge game changer. This is where you also can start seeing the effects of what the market is saying from a pricing allocation and where you can actually make more money. For example, if you're selling a shirt that's potentially like another shirt that's in the market, or a pair of pants or something to that effect, and you're able to sell those units at, say, $79 a piece for each unit, if your cost is $75 to manufacture or to create that, that means, of course, you only made $5, right? or $4 or $5. That can potentially cause major impacts. You now have to sell huge amounts of units in
Mm.
order to get the enough money to be able to keep your business afloat. But if you know that it actually costs you $24, that completely changes the game when it comes to getting a visualization on what you can do and how you can grow with your business. It helps you to understand where you potentially can give discounts on things, where you can run special offers, and making sure you're reviewing that every single month becomes really important, especially when it ties back to the amount of expense you spend on it, who you're buying your materials from, and how you're selling those pieces, what's going into packaging and everything else like that. Um, Also, along with this too, we strongly recommend that you do an inventory count. Making sure that your inventory is in complete compliance is really important. You want to know, do I have 10 units of this? Do I have 12 units of this? And why it's so important isn't just because we want good accounting records. It's because you want to know if I'm selling or have that unit posted on my website as well as in Amazon, that I'm not overselling the inventory that I have, that you're not getting put in a position where all of a sudden you sell 15 units and you only had 10 left in inventory and hadn't had planned to buy an additional 5 units. And so now you're stuck in a position where you have to ask for refunds, or you have to refund your customers back, and potential cause other, issues from that perspective. And so really understanding your inventory accounts is really critical. And then the shrinkage or adjustment comes into this as well, which is super important. This is an area where you're going to see, did something get damaged in the warehouse? Was there something that we shipped out to someone and it came back damaged, or something to that effect? Did someone walk away with it? That's definitely common. That happens when it comes to clothing. Did we give a pair of pants to someone that we didn't mark off? Did we give it to an influencer or something to that effect? It's so important to make sure that we're monitoring those counts, because that inventory shrinkage and adjustment can start to get bloated in a lot of cases if we're not paying attention to it. And that's where you can lose a lot of your profit, because you're making no money off of those items that are going out the door that weren't a revenue generating transaction.
Yeah. And if you're not accounting for all of these things, like one of the things that's been popping out to me, Dan, as you've been talking about everything here, is if you don't know where the losses are coming from or where the gains are coming from, it's so hard to diagnose the issue and then work to resolve it.
Yeah, very much so. And I'll say this, especially when it comes to, and this last topic is always a hard topic, that, adjusting inventory, because a lot of times especially when you're first getting started, you have a lot of people close to you, friends and family or friends of friends, coming to help you to make sure you're getting things packaged, make sure things are happening from that perspective, and kind of getting out and moving from that perspective. Sometimes inventory walks off. Whether you were using it as a compensation component or whether someone actually takes it, knowing what that potential impact and change is can dramatically affect your ability to sell things in the future, or affect what you have listed on your website. And so monitoring that becomes really important. It's not saying we don't trust people, but it's just a part of doing business, that shrinkage and losses are really truly an impact that we have to be paying attention to.
100%.
Compliance and reporting, we save the best for last, right? This is where it comes to our sales tax and making sure everything's really taken care of from that perspective. You really do need to know how much you sold in every single state or province or location or country that you have going on. You need to make sure you're gathering that information together, because that information really is going to tell whether you have nexus. And nexus means that you've either crossed an economic, or which means dollar amount, or a physical component, which now requires you to actually have to collect sales tax or VAT tax in that given place. And so understanding where you're selling completely across the board becomes really important. One of the things specifically that we find with people who start out as a brick and mortar, they know all about sales tax. They're very familiar with it and dealing with their retail location. They're very common. They understand it. They're already registered with the state because their employees are there. The moment they start selling on an e-commerce standpoint, or through their web store or things of that nature, they don't think about paying attention to the other states or other locations that they're shipping inventory into. And this is where it gets really tricky, because every state and country has their own laws. And that's the part that becomes really hard for you as a business owner, is understanding how to manage that. So if you are in a position where you're selling across multi-channels and you have different, forms and streams that are coming in, wholesale, retail, e-commerce, everything from that perspective, you want to make sure you have a really good system in place to help you track that. to be able to make sure you can aggregate it together. There's tools like Avalara or things of that nature that can help you to be able to get really good detail and context there, and also tell you when you've hit nexus or when you've crossed these thresholds that these states or countries require. And so make sure you're paying special attention to that. And then, of course, make sure you're filing correctly in each of those states as well, too. The next piece, of course, with this is making sure that we're reviewing and potentially editing transactions. So is there something we need to cancel out? Is there an order that someone called in that they canceled? Was there a rush order that we didn't charge for? Reviewing that detail becomes really important for you to understand the change with those. When it comes to selling cross-border, you're dealing with different levels of currency. So if you're in Canada and now you're selling into the US, the Canadian dollar is different value than the US dollar. And so you need to make sure you're understanding what is the gain or loss on each of those transactions. Did we make more money because we sold across the border versus not? Understanding all of that can definitely impact also the margins that you have on inventory. Good example, and I'll just do a brief example of this, is a client that we worked with that was that had a really good 2 or 3 years worth of really heavy growth in the US. They were starting to hit really good markets when it comes to selling their clothing line. They were really hitting the ground hard, and they were able to sell on their website. They were able to sell on Amazon really, really well. They decided to branch out into a different country, and so they decided with Canada was going to be their first place that they moved into. So they took their information from the US and built estimates for all the context that they were going to do in Canada. And so they loaded up the inventory in Canada before testing the market, and put all the information, put all that into the warehouse to be able to cut down on, shipping costs and shipping time and everything from that perspective. 6 months later, they decided to pull out of Canada because they didn't get the effect that they were looking for. They weren't able to hit the margins that they were looking for. And so when it comes to dealing with this, like that currency conversion can impact your margins very heavily. Plus, also, when you're diving into a new market, make sure you understand the market as a whole. Do some testing with it, send potentially smaller amounts of inventory, do some of that market analysis to make sure you're best prepared. Because if not, it's going to eat into the other margins or other products that you have that are more profitable or other sales channels. And then, of course, number 19, this is us reviewing everything. Once we've done all the extra work of putting everything in the system and verifying it and everything from that perspective, we now get a chance to actually look at it. We get a look at the product you created. You get a look at your business as a whole, and you can now do analysis. You can now do reviews on what's happening. This is where once you've done all the extra steps, you get the opportunity to really now understand how your business did, which becomes the most important step in all of this. Once the data is there, you now actually can decide, do we need to change something? Do we need to adjust something? Is it as looking in the way that we expected? Did our marketing strategy turn the way we expected? Did our discounts we offer too many on this potential product line? Do we need to change some of those pieces going to the next period? All of that you now can do now that you have good finalized products and information at the end.
What sales channels are actually profitable, right? Like that's one of my favorite ones because we talked earlier about how one of the most important things is getting your product in front of as many potential buyers as humanly possible. But if you
100%.
don't have a broken down understanding of performance across every channel, it can be hard to know what levers are working and which ones aren't, which ones are kind of like borderline, and then what to optimize for on the ones that are borderline, right?
And I think a good example of this for us is people who start out on clients that we've worked that start out on Etsy. Etsy is a very different marketplace than through Amazon. And so understanding your revenue generation, understanding your costs between the two, understanding the consumer market between the two of them, they're very, very different. And so you have to treat them differently when it comes to seeing what's going on. And so you want to be able to see that so that you can make sure that your margins hit where they need to be, especially when it comes to coming out of Etsy and starting to sell in other channels. That's going to potentially affect your sales price. That's going to potentially affect your cost of goods sold that you weren't prepared for when you were selling under a different channel before. And so this just gives you better visualization. It helps you to be able to make better decisions. And again, helps you to be able to grow a whole lot easier because you know where your money's going.
Awesome. Cool. So we're now past kind of the nitty gritty, which the checklist should hopefully be helpful. But do you want to add some additional tips that might be helpful at the month end process when bookkeeping for your fashion brand?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things we hit on in the beginning was talking about utilizing tools like A2X to be able to help aggregate your information. this is one of those things, when we look at all those steps, it can simplify a lot of those steps for you, especially if you're using those systems right. So A2X does a great job gathering and pushing your data into your general ledger system. It does a good job putting you in a position to where you can visually see it very easily. And it helps you to simplify the reconciliation process because it does a lot of that work for you. So if you are a fashion brand and you are looking at growing and scaling and you are selling in multi-channels, definitely dive into A2X, take a look at it, because it's going to give you the opportunity to be able to see that stuff and that information very, very quickly together. Next piece with this, which I think is super important, is understand your inventory. Really know where your cost is going, really know what's being impacted from you understand and know how much inventory you're holding on for a period, and does it match and coincide with your sales cycle. If you're holding 6 months worth of inventory, but you have a 2-month sales cycle, you need to change that context. You need to make sure you have better visualization because you're holding up so much cost in that inventory. And so be prepared with that. Make sure that you're staying on top of it. And then last but not least, make sure you're in compliance. The last thing that you want to find out as a business owner is you owe some state or some province money that you weren't planning for. The nice thing about sales tax is when you stay compliant with it, you're collecting other people's money and you're passing it along to the state or to the government. In the situation where the government finds out you haven't been collecting it, they're now taking your money. And so that's the one thing we don't want to put ourselves into the position with, is that they start taking our money because we weren't compliant. We want to be able to use that as a part of the original transactions that we sold, we collected it, and we passed it along correctly, so that you don't get stuck with the bill at the end.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so given the fact that I'm the head of marketing here at A2X, I'd be remiss if this presentation didn't have somewhat of a small product plug. And the product plug is as it relates to fashion brands that are selling online through e-commerce channels like Shopify, Amazon, eBay, Etsy, Walmart, BigCommerce, so on and so forth. If you are selling on these channels, you've likely experienced the problem that I'm showcasing right here on this slide. And it's this idea that you're selling across all of these e-commerce platforms, and they're providing you with payouts, deposits that are showing up on your bank feed. If you're already trying to do your bookkeeping in QuickBooks or Xero, you usually see these payouts as a net deposit. A lot of the times what we see happening is that, well, actually go to the next slide because the next slide has the issues. People ignore it and they just submit that deposit as sales, right? So they don't actually break down each of the individual transactions that make up that payout. So then that Shopify instance, as an example, I'll just go back to this slide here. That $15,000 is $24,000 in sales, and then their shipping income and their sales tax collected. But then also on the reduction side, there's gift card liabilities, pending payments, disputes. Really breaking out those individual transactions is critical to getting some level of visibility into how your Shopify store is actually performing, or any of your other e-commerce channels. So what ends up happening is, the majority of people, Dan, and you probably agree to this, kind of ignore it. That's what we see most of the time, yeah. Apathy. The other part of the time is they try to create best guess assumptions on how to categorize those transactions, or they spend hours doing it manually. And that's kind of where A2X comes in. We just act as the intermediary between your sales channel and your accounting software. We organize all of your transactions into their appropriate accounts so that, that Shopify payout that I was showing there at $15,000 that was made up of sales, fees, gift cards, taxes, so on and so forth. We break that all down into an accurate journal entry that reconciles perfectly in your accounting software. So again, we pull the data from the reports, we break it down into a summary, and then we post it to your accounting software, whether Xero, QuickBooks, NetSuite, or Sage, that matches to the deposit on your bank feed and allows you to reconcile in one click. Once you've done all of this, the really cool thing is you get to see all of those individual breakdowns on your P&L. So when Dan's talking about financial reporting, this is a big part of it, a big element. And A2X helps you from an e-commerce perspective. Dan, I can talk about A2X all day long, but as one of our top partners, anything that I might be missing or anything that you'd want to add?
You brought up a comment around the visualization. That was really the focal point of the first slide that we looked at. And the part that I love about seeing it from that perspective is that's an area we oftentimes, especially when we're just running a business or getting started, you're not thinking about all the things that aren't hitting your bank account because you're really just trying to run and you're trying to move as quickly as you can. And so you are mentally looking at that and saying, oh, great, we made $15,000 or $14,000 this month, when in reality, there were so many more things that happened in all of those sales transactions that can potentially cause you later on to not have the profits or the cash to be able to buy your inventory. And one of the biggest things we see, especially when people are getting started with, with their clothing brands and things of that nature, is they offer discounts, really heavy discounts in the beginning to be able to get buyers in the door. Without having that transparency of the discounts that they're offering, you really start to miss on understanding where your margins are and what you're actually making from a profit standpoint. And so that just becomes just as critical as much as the gift cards and everything else, to be able to, again, to provide you just with better visualization and better decision-making processes. And so you really need that detail to be able to make sure that your business is successful every single month, instead of putting yourself in a situation where you're having to find out about it 3 to 6 months later after things have kind of fallen off the rails a little bit.
You'd be shocked by the amount of businesses that we see come through our doors that are doing 6 to 7 figures in sales, whether monthly or annually, but that are actually not making any money.
Yeah,
And
it's super common.
don't really know, or their margins are razor thin and they don't really know. And that's where, to your point, the visualization of all of this data becomes massively important, because accurate accounting and bookkeeping really gives you the insight into how your business is actually performing. And then again, like when we say, like, it sounds so fluffy to say accurate financials, make better decisions. This is what we're talking about, right? Like if you're providing too many discounts and that's cutting into your margins and you're not really making enough money, like, well, maybe you need to reevaluate, or maybe you're providing shipping for free. And that's actually, making the sale of a product cost more to acquire than it does to fulfill, right? So, I'm sorry, Dan. Go ahead.
And I think one of the things that ties into it as well too is we also live in a day and age where there's so many different ways to collect payment from your customers. Going through Shopify, you can connect 100 different payment options for your customers to be able to pay you for the services or goods that are going on. Some of them are delayed payments, some of them are not, some of them are directly through Shopify, some of them are not. Being able to, and this is part of the reason why we love A2X and why we refer it to every single one of our e-commerce clients that we work with, is it allows you to understand and reconcile that information and really understand also the fee structure that you're paying to every single one of those tools. Because you may find that you really don't need to offer all of those options and solutions because, number one, you're not seeing the volume come through them as much as often, or you also might be paying really large, fees for each of those, different channels as well, that you want to make sure you can control better. And
100%.
so really gives you better visualization. And I know I love saying the word visualization and accurate, but making better decisions is one of the most important parts of why we focus on accuracy and visibility. It's helping you to be able to grow and make just good decisions to keep your business alive and thrive.
Okay, so this was really, I believe, an incredible webinar. The knowledge and the experiences and the expertise that you shared, Dan, very much appreciative of it. One of the things that's really cool, though, is if you enjoyed Dan's talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about IgniteSpot now, if that's all right with you.
Appreciate it.
Here's just kind of like a quick image of the team. And I've had the good fortune of actually meeting almost half of the people on this list. And they are all just as knowledgeable, kind, generous as Dan. And I don't want to say if not more, but there are some guns on this list.
Definitely.
So the
More
team
for
that you've
sure.
built, the team that you've built at IgniteSpot is just absolutely incredible. So if you're in need of accounting or bookkeeping support, would highly recommend IgniteSpot. You can access them on their website, or you can find them on the A2X e-commerce accountant directory. Dan, anything that you'd like to add that I might not have mentioned?
I really appreciate all the compliments. My team is definitely way smarter than I am. They are just wonderful people, and they come with vast knowledge and experience across multiple industries and across multiple verticals. They really do understand what your needs are, and they are more excited about making sure you have better understanding of your business than even really I can show. They really are an amazing group of people, and we'd love for you to give us a chance.
Amazing. Cool. So that's the end of the webinar. If you do want to try A2X, you can go ahead and do that on A2X's website. If you're watching this on demand, the links for both IgniteSpot as well as A2X are going to be in the description down below. If you're watching this live, we will send you a webinar recording as well as any additional information that we might have mentioned during the actual live broadcast. Dan, thanks again so much for spending the time with me and for sharing your expertise. Very much appreciate it. Massively valuable. I learned a ton of things as well. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.